Welcome, my friends. Take a slow breath. Are you ready for a story? Today, we are going to talk about something you think you already know. Every year, on March 17th, millions of people around the world put on green clothes, pour green drinks, and fill the streets with music and laughter. Cities you would never connect to Ireland, Chicago, Buenos Aires, Sydney, Tokyo, turn green for a single day. The holiday is loud, it is colorful, it is everywhere. But here's a question I want you to sit with for a moment. What are we actually celebrating? If someone stopped you in the street today and asked, "What is St. Patrick's Day really about?" what would you say? Most people say something about Ireland. Some mention a saint. A few remember a story about snakes, but almost nobody can tell you the full story. And the full story, my friends, is far more surprising than a parade. It is a story about a boy who was kidnapped. It is a story about 6 years of total isolation, the state of being completely alone, cut off from everyone and everything you love. It is a story about a man who chose to return to the very place that had broken him. And it is a story about how one small green leaf became one of the most recognized symbols on the entire planet. Are you ready? Good. Let us begin at the very beginning, before the green lights, before the parades, before Ireland even knew his name. The man the world calls St. Patrick was not born Patrick. His name was Maewyn Succat, and he was born around the year 385 AD in Roman Britain, most likely in the area we now call Wales or Scotland. He was not Irish. He did not grow up dreaming of Ireland. In fact, for most of his early life, Ireland barely crossed his mind. Maewyn grew up in comfort. His father was a Roman official, a man of status, which means a person with a respected and powerful position in society. The family had a stone house, enough food, warm clothes, and servants. Maewyn was a teenager who enjoyed his privilege. Privilege means having advantages and comforts that other people do not have. He was not particularly religious. He did not spend his days reading. He was, by his own later admission, a typical boy of his class. A little lazy, a little careless, and completely unprepared for what was coming. Then one day, the sky fell. Maewyn was around 16 years old when Irish pirates landed on the shore near his family's estate. These were raiders, men who crossed the sea not to trade, but to take. They took livestock, they took valuable objects, and they took people. In a single violent morning, Maewyn was grabbed, pulled away from everything he had ever known, and loaded onto a cold, wet boat heading west across the Irish Sea. Think about that for a moment. One ordinary morning, you are a teenager at home. By evening, you are a captive on a boat, watching your country disappear behind you. You do not know where you are going. You do not know if you will ever see your family again. You do not even know if you will survive the crossing. This is what we call a rupture, a sudden, violent break in the story of a person's life. A rupture tears apart the person you were and throws the pieces into the air. What those pieces become when they land is the real question. Maewyn was sold as a slave to a man in the north of Ireland. His name, his family, his social status, all of it was gone. He was sent to a cold mountain called Slimish to herd sheep. And there, alone on that mountain, the story of St. Patrick truly begins. Imagine 6 years on a mountain. Not 6 years with a phone, a book, and a warm bed. 6 years of real isolation. The wind, the rain, the silence. the hunger, because there was often very little food, the cold, because there were never enough clothes. For the first months, Maywin's inner voice was almost certainly filled with rage and grief. Why did this happen? When will I escape? Why is no one coming for me? These are the thoughts any person would have. They are natural. They are human. But something strange and powerful happens to a mind that is given enough silence and enough time. It starts to listen. Maywin began to pray, not out of duty or routine, but out of a deep, desperate need for connection, for something to hold on to in the middle of that vast loneliness. He later wrote that he prayed 100 times during the day and 100 times at night. He prayed in the woods before dawn. He prayed on the hillside in the rain. He prayed when he was hungry and when he was cold and when he felt most forgotten. This was the beginning of what we can call a spiritual awakening. A spiritual awakening is a moment or a long, slow season when a person discovers a deeper sense of meaning and connection that goes beyond everyday life. It does not always arrive with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it arrives quietly, the way the sun arrives on a winter morning, slowly, gently, until you realize the world is brighter than it was before. But the mountain gave Maywin more than faith. It gave him something equally important: knowledge. Because Maywin was not just suffering on that hill. He was listening, he was watching, every day living among the Irish people, even as a slave. He was absorbing their language, their rhythms, their customs. He was learning, without knowing he was learning, the very things that would one day make him an extraordinary communicator. Have you ever gone through a very hard period in your life, a time when everything felt impossible, and later realized that the hard time was actually preparing you for something? That the difficulty was not just punishment, but education? This is exactly what happened on Mount Slemish. The prison was also a school. The isolation was also a preparation. Then, one night, Maywin heard a voice in his sleep. "Your ship is ready," the voice said. "Look to the coast." The coast was 200 miles away. What Maywin did next is one of the most quietly extraordinary acts in this entire story. He ran. Not in a dramatic movie-style escape. Carefully, at night, hiding in the shadows, moving across a wild country where he was legally someone else's property, where being caught almost certainly meant death or severe punishment. He had no map. He had no money. He had no guarantee that the ship from his dream would actually be there. He walked for 200 miles on nothing but his intuition. Intuition is that deep inner knowing, the feeling that something is right or true, even when you cannot explain it logically. Most of us have felt intuition in small ways. A feeling that we should call someone. A sense that a decision is wrong. Maywin staked his life on his. When he finally reached the coast, a ship was there, exactly as the voice had said, but the captain did not want to take him. Maywin did not give up. He waited, he prayed, he persisted, and eventually the captain changed his mind. This small detail, the captain refusing and then agreeing, tells us something important about who Maywin was becoming. He was no longer the passive boy who had been carried away on a boat. He was a person who could wait, endure, and keep moving forward even when the door was closed. Suffering had given him something that comfort never could: resilience. Resilience is the ability to recover from difficult situations and keep going. It is not a quality we are simply born with. It is a quality we build piece by painful piece in the hard places of our lives. Maywin sailed home to Britain. His family wept when they saw him. They held him and said, "Stay. Never leave us again. You are home now. You are safe." And for a time, he did stay. He studied. He became a priest. He rebuilt a life. But the mountain was not finished with him yet. The dreams came back. Night after night, Maewyn, now a trained priest, now going by the Latin name Patricius, which we know as Patrick, heard the voices of the Irish people calling to him, not with hatred, not with chains, with need. "Come back," they said. "Come back and walk among us." And now we arrive at what I believe is the most surprising moment in this entire story. He went back. Stop and think about what that means. The country that had kidnapped him, the land where he had spent 6 years as a slave, cold and hungry and forgotten, the place that had taken his teenage years, his freedom, his name. He chose to return to it, not by force, not by accident, willingly. Most people, given the choice, run away from the places that hurt them. We avoid the difficult memory, the painful relationship, the city that holds our worst moments. We put as much distance as we can between ourselves and our wounds. This is natural. This is human. But Patrick did the opposite. He moved toward his wound. He transformed his place of trauma into his place of purpose. Trauma is a deeply painful experience that leaves a lasting mark on a person. Patrick had every right to his trauma. He had every reason to stay in Britain and live quietly and never think about Ireland again. Instead, he chose something far more difficult: reconciliation. Reconciliation means making peace with something painful, not pretending the pain was not real, but choosing not to be defined by it. When Patrick stepped back onto Irish soil, he was not the same person who had been dragged off it in chains. He was a man who had gone to the bottom of himself and come back up changed. He spoke the language of the people he had come to serve. He understood their stories, their fears, their way of seeing the world. He had not just survived Ireland. He had learned it from the inside, and that made all the difference. Patrick faced a problem that every great teacher faces. He had a complex idea to explain to people who had no prior framework for it. The idea was the Trinity, the Christian belief that God is, at the same time, 3 distinct persons and one unified being. 3, and yet 1. How do you explain something like that? Something so philosophically rich and strange to farmers, shepherds, and fishermen who had never heard it before. Do you write a long theological document? Do you stand at a lectern and deliver a formal lecture? Patrick did neither of those things. He looked down. There on the ground, growing between the rocks and the grass, was a small 3-leafed clover, a shamrock. Patrick picked it up, held it out, and said, in words something like these, "Do you see this? 3 leaves, 1 plant. That is the idea." This is the genius of a metaphor. Metaphor is when you use one familiar, simple thing to help people understand something complex and unfamiliar. The shamrock did not just explain a concept. It rooted the explanation in the world the Irish people already knew and loved, the natural world, the green earth beneath their feet. It said, the answer is not far away in some distant, complicated place. It is right here, in the ordinary, in the small. Think about the best teachers or communicators you have ever encountered. Did they use complicated language to show how much they knew? Or did they take something difficult and make it feel close and simple? The ability to meet people exactly where they are is one of the rarest skills a human being can have. Patrick had it naturally because he had lived among these people. He knew their language, not just their words, but their way of thinking. The shamrock became a symbol, an object that carries a meaning bigger than itself. Today, it is printed on everything from football jerseys to airport signs. But every time you see that small three-leafed plant, you are actually looking at a teaching tool. A little piece of grass that once helped a former slave explain one of the biggest ideas in the history of human thought. Let us talk about the snakes. You have almost certainly heard the legend. It says that St. Patrick drove all the snakes out of Ireland, that he stood on a hilltop and banished every serpent from the island into the sea, never to return. It is one of the most famous miracle stories attached to any saint. Here's the surprising part. There were no snakes. Scientists confirmed that Ireland has never had a native snake population. The island's climate and geography during the last ice age meant that snakes simply never established themselves there. So Patrick could not have driven out snakes, because there were no snakes to drive out. So why does the story exist? Because it is not about snakes. The story uses symbolism, a technique where one thing represents something else entirely. The snakes in this story symbolize the old ways of fear. They represent the beliefs and superstitions that the pre-Christian Irish used to explain a dangerous and uncertain world. Patrick's message, his teaching, his presence, his way of living, gradually replaced those fear-based systems with something different. He did not banish animals. He helped banish a way of living. He helped people move from fear toward what felt to them like freedom. Now here's the question I want you to ask yourself. Not about ancient Ireland, but about your own life. What are the snakes in your story? What old fears, old habits, or old ways of thinking are still living inside you, keeping you small or keeping you stuck? We all have them. The bitterness from an old wound, the voice that says we are not enough, the habit that feels comfortable but is quietly draining us. The legend of Patrick and the snakes is an invitation. It is asking us, what would your life look like if those snakes were gone? Patrick died around the year 461 AD. He was buried in Ireland, the island that had enslaved him and that he had chosen twice to call home. For a few centuries, he was remembered mostly within Ireland itself as its patron saint, the figure who, tradition says, helped bring learning and art to a wild island at the edge of the known world. Then the Irish began to leave. Over the centuries, pushed by invasion, by poverty, and most devastatingly by the Great Famine of the 1840s, which killed or displaced over 2 million people, the Irish scattered across the globe. This scattering of a people from their homeland is called a diaspora. The Irish diaspora is one of the largest in human history. Today, an estimated 70 million people worldwide claim Irish ancestry compared to just 5 million people actually living in Ireland. Wherever these millions of Irish people went, to America, to Australia, to Canada, to Argentina, they brought Patrick with them. Not as a religious obligation, but as an act of identity. His day became a way of saying, I am still Irish. No matter how far I am from home, no matter how much time has passed, there is something inside me that belongs to that small green island. The holiday grew. It became one of the most widely celebrated national days on the planet. In the United States alone, more people claim Irish heritage than the entire population of Ireland. So when the streets of New York or Boston turn green on March 17th, something genuine is happening. Something about belonging, about home, about carrying your origins with you, even when the map says you are somewhere else entirely. This is called cultural resonance, the power of a story or tradition to connect with people across different times, places, and lives. Patrick's story has cultural resonance because it is not really a story about Ireland at all. It is a story about being taken from home and finding a way back. It is a story about suffering that becomes purpose. These are not Irish themes. They are human themes. And that is why the whole world shows up for the party. My friends, here's what I want you to take away from today's story. The most important thing to remember: the world celebrates St. Patrick's Day as a party. And parties are wonderful. Do not let anyone take the joy out of a good celebration. But underneath the green and the music is one of the most quietly powerful ideas a human life can demonstrate. Your most painful experience may also be your greatest teacher. Maewyn Suchet did not choose to be kidnapped. He did not choose the mountain. He did not choose 6 years of hunger and cold and loneliness. But he chose what to do with all of it. He chose to listen instead of becoming numb. He chose to learn instead of just surviving. He chose to go back instead of running away. And in making those choices, he transformed not just himself, but an entire island. Transformation is a complete and deep change, not just in what a person does, but in who they are. Patrick's transformation was not instantaneous. It was not comfortable. It was built slowly, one cold night at a time, one prayer at a time, 1 mile of a 200-mile walk at a time. That is how real transformation usually works. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small, difficult choices made in the dark when no one is watching. The next time you see a shamrock, on a card, on a shirt, growing in a crack in the pavement, remember what it actually is. It is not just a lucky charm. It is not just a decoration. It is a teaching tool held in the hands of a former slave who walked 200 miles on a dream, went back to the place that broke him, and decided to use everything the hard years had given him to help the people who had once taken everything from him. That is not a party. That is a life, and it is worth remembering. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I hope this story gave you something to think about your own mountains, your own returns, your own small green leaves. If you are learning English with us, well done for making it all the way to the end. You have heard some rich vocabulary today: isolation, resilience, trauma, reconciliation, metaphor, symbolism, diaspora, cultural resonance, transformation. Keep these words. Use them. They are yours now. Until next time, take care of yourself. Keep listening. Keep learning. And happy St. Patrick's Day, not just for the color green, but for the remarkable, surprising, deeply human story underneath it.